The engine of the Dodge Challenger screamed through the rain-soaked streets of Seoul like something feral had been let loose in the city. Tires bit into wet asphalt, headlights cutting white slashes through the black downpour as two power bikes flanked the car from both sides, their riders leaning in with weapons already raised. Inside the car, Rihan Taran drove with one hand on the wheel and the other pressed flat against his left side where his black sleeve had already soaked through dark red. He was bleeding. He knew it. He kept driving. The bikes came closer. One rider leveled his weapon and fired. Rihan dropped his shoulder, the shot spiderwebbing the passenger window instead of finding him, and in one fluid motion, he returned fire through the glass. The first bike went down screaming, metal grinding against road, sparks flying like broke stars across the wet street. The second rider overcorrected trying to avoid the wreckage, and the Challenger clipped his front wheel at 90 kilometers per hour. The bike cartwheeled. The rider did not get up. Rihan eased off the gas. Breathing. Controlled. His jaw tight, his eyes steady, the rain hammering the roof above him like it had something to prove. His phone buzzed on the center console. He glanced down. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Unknown, I want you. He stared at it for 3 full seconds. Something happened in those 3 seconds that Rihan Taran could not have explained to any man alive. The tattoo behind his left ear, a single clean line of Korean characters he had carried since birth, grew warm against his skin. Not painfully, the way an ember grows warm when someone finally breathes on it. He picked up the phone. He typed 2 words. On my way. He ran her number through his network before the next traffic light. In 40 seconds flat, he had her name, her floor, her building in Mapogu, her employer, her visa status, and the name of the man whose shadow she had been living under for 3 years. He read the name Kim Young and something shifted behind his eyes. Then he pulled back into traffic, pressed his palm harder against his bleeding side, and drove. Her name was Damilare Toluwani, and she was standing at her bathroom mirror in a towel, slightly drunk and deeply certain she had just made the worst mistake of her life. She was 27 years old. Nigerian. Long straight hair still damp at the ends from the shower. Dark skin catching the warm bathroom light in a way that might have been beautiful if she were paying attention to herself, which she never did. She had come to Seoul 3 years ago because of a man who told her he loved her, and she had stayed because leaving felt like trying to swim out of concrete. She looked at the number on her phone screen. 1 digit wrong. Just 1. She had sent that text, that stupid, wine-soft, ovulation brain text, to a stranger. And the stranger had said, on my way. Anya, 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 she whispered to her reflection. No, no, no. She was still in the towel when she moved to the bedroom and changed into her black silk pajamas, fingers fumbling with the buttons. Think. She could text back. Say wrong number, so sorry, please forget this ever happened. She picked up the phone and was composing exactly that message when her eye caught the screen again. The reply had come in 12 seconds. 12. Who replies to a stranger in 12 seconds and says on my way like they were already waiting to be called? Her phone buzzed again. But it wasn't a text this time. It was her front door. 3 knocks. Steady. Not urgent. Not frantic. The kind of knock that already knows you're home. Damilare stood completely still in the middle of her bedroom. She walked to the door. She looked through the peephole. And then she stood there for a moment doing absolutely nothing because the man in her hallway was not what fear looked like. He was tall. Genuinely, structurally tall in a way that changed the proportions of the corridor. Long black hair soaked through and darkened by rain, some strands fallen forward across his face. Black sleeve. And on his left side, spreading steadily dark through the fabric, blood. She opened the door. Who are you? She said. He opened his mouth to answer. The balcony exploded. Not metaphorically. The glass doors detonated inward in a shower of fragments as the helicopter rose level with her floor, its mounted guns sweeping toward the opening. Rihan moved before she processed what was happening, his body covering hers completely, driving her back into the hallway with one arm while the other braced against the wall. Glass and wind and the roar of rotors filled the apartment behind them. Damilare's back hit the hallway wall. She couldn't breathe. Not from the impact, from the inside. Her chest had gone tight and small, and her vision was narrowing at the edges the way it did when the panic attacks came, the one she had never told Kim about because Kim did not believe in panic attacks. Her hands were shaking. She could not make them stop. Rihan looked at her. He read it in 2 seconds. All of it, the tight chest, the narrowing vision, the hands. He did not tell her to calm down. He did not tell her to breathe. He took her face in both hands and he kissed her. It was not a timid kiss. It was not confused or apologetic. It was the most deliberate thing Damilare had ever experienced, present and complete, like a hand pressed flat against a wound to stop the bleeding. Like someone saying you are here, you are here, you are here without using a single word. The shaking slowed. Her vision cleared. The tight thing in her chest loosened 1 careful degree. She stared at him. Who are you? She said again. Quieter now. 나중에 설명할게요. I'll explain later. Right now both our lives are in danger and we need to move. They ran up the stairwell, not down. She found out later that he had already known the lobby was compromised before he ever knocked on her door. This was the kind of man Rihan Taran was. He calculated exits before he entered. Always, the way some people breathe. The roof door burst open into cold air and rain, and the full weight of a Seoul night pressing down from above. The city glittered 30 floors below them in every direction, beautiful and completely indifferent. 6 men spread out from the stairwell behind them. The helicopter held position above, its searchlight flooding the roof white. 6 assault rifles. 1 helicopter. Nowhere left that wasn't down. Rihan turned to face her. Rain on his face, on the strands of hair across his cheekbone, on the dark shoulder of his sleeve. That stillness that never left him, the particular stillness of someone who has already decided what they are willing to do and made peace with it. Do you trust me? I don't even know your name, Damilare said. Do you trust me? She looked at the rifles. She looked at the helicopter. She looked at him. Maybe. He took her hand. The grip was certain. No hesitation, no question in it. He held her hand the way people hold things they have been waiting a long time to hold. They stepped off the edge. A shot fired from behind them. It caught Rihan in the shoulder and he made no sound at all. They fell. And fell. And Seoul disappeared. She woke on cold ground with her cheek against earth that smelled like rain and iron and something older than any word she knew for old. Trees above her, enormous, the kind of trees that have never been near a city in their entire existence. Stars that were too many and too bright and arranged in patterns she did not recognize. Air that moved through the leaves with a sound like breathing, like something alive and enormous was resting nearby. Rihan was beside her, unconscious. His chest was rising and falling, but his face was slack and his shoulder had soaked his sleeve through completely. Damilare scrambled upright and grabbed his arm. His shoulder shook him. Wake up. Wake up right now. Don't you dare. Wake up. Her voice cracked on the last word in a way she would have been embarrassed about if she had been paying attention to herself, which she was not. She was paying attention to him, this stranger she had known for 40 minutes who had put his body between her and a bullet and now would not open his eyes. The way you're hitting me, he said, eyes sliding open, voice rough and almost amused. That might kill me. She made a sound that was halfway between a sob and a laugh and was really neither. That is not funny. Little bit funny. Where are we? She looked around. Trees. Stars. Earth. The absence of everything Seoul. What happened? We jumped off a building. I know. We jumped off a 30-floor building. I know. He pushed himself to sitting, jaw tightening at the movement, and looked at his shoulder with the dispassionate assessment of a man who has been shot before and found it inconvenient. He tore a strip from his sleeve and pressed it against the wound. This isn't Seoul, Damilare. This is another plane. A different dimension. She stared at him. We need to reach the kingdom before nightfall. It isn't safe out here in the open. The words sat in the air between them. Kingdom. You hit your head, she said. I didn't. When we landed. You hit your head and now you think. Look. He nodded toward the treeline. She turned. Through the ancient trunks, between branches that had never been touched by city light, torchlight. Warm and amber and unmistakably intentional. And beyond it, stone. A wall. A gate so old it looked like the earth had grown it. Damilare looked at it for a long moment. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. She walked into Sierrabiel in her black silk pajamas. Later she would think about this, about the fact that she had been summoned to an ancient Korean kingdom in another dimension, and she arrived in silk pajamas and bare feet, and somehow the kingdom received her like she was wearing a crown. The soldiers at the gate bowed their heads when Rihan passed. The women in their layered hanbok, deep colors, silk and linen and embroidered edges, paused in their paths and looked at her. Not at her clothes. Not at her face. At her back. At the spot between her shoulder blades where the sigil sat beneath her pajama fabric, the birthmark her grandmother had called a crown. 왜 다들 저를 쳐다봐요? Why is everyone staring at me? She said, even though she didn't speak Korean. The words came out anyway. Rihan glanced at her sideways and something moved in his expression. I'll explain soon. You keep saying that. And I keep meaning it. Lord Taeseok came through the throne room doors as the last amber burned out of the sky. He wore deep blue and gold hanbok that moved like something living, and he carried himself the way mountains carry themselves, simply, without effort, because weight was not a burden to something built to bear it. He looked at Rihan first. His son. His eyes moved to the wound, then back to Rihan's face, and everything a father needed to say and everything a son needed to receive passed between them in complete silence. Then he looked at Damilare. It was not the look of a king examining a stranger. It was the look of a man seeing confirmation of something he had believed for so long that the belief had become indistinguishable from breath. Son. You made it. He held Rihan's face briefly, firmly, the way men hold what they almost lost. Then he turned. Child, I know you have many questions. You are exhausted and frightened, and none of this is what you expected your Thursday night to be. The faintest warmth at the corner of his mouth. Rest. Bathe. Eat. Then I will tell you everything. Maids appeared at Damilare's side. She looked at Rihan, one look, sharp and involuntary, that said, don't you dare leave me here with strangers in a dimension I didn't know existed this morning, and he held her gaze and gave her the smallest nod. A promise. Brief and complete. She followed the maids. The chamber they brought her to was warm and lantern-lit, with walls of pale stone and a window that looked out over rooftops she didn't recognize against a sky full of too many stars. The bath was already drawn, deep and steaming, with night flowers floating across the surface whose petals were a color she had no name for, something between purple and the feeling of almost remembering something important. She sank into it and sat there for a long time doing nothing but breathing. Her mother used to say that hot water fixed the outside of a problem, so you could think more clearly about the inside. Her mother said a lot of things that Damilare had spent 3 years in Seoul not having the quiet to remember. She thought about Kim. She thought about the hotel receipt for 2 that she had never mentioned. She thought about her old phone, the one he had smashed against the wall because she had texted a male colleague from work. She thought about the way she had convinced herself over and over, in different configurations of the same lie, that what she felt for him was love and not the particular Stockholm of owing someone your entire infrastructure. Then she thought about a stranger who had put his body between her and a helicopter and not made a single sound when a bullet found his shoulder. She got out of the bath. The maids dressed her in a hanbok, deep burgundy and gold, layered and embroidered at the hem and collar with patterns she would later learn were 400 years old. It fit her like it had been made for her measurements. Because it had. Because someone 400 years ago had written down measurements for a woman whose name they did not yet know. She looked at herself in the polished bronze mirror. Nigerian woman. Ancient Korean dress. A kingdom that had been waiting for her. Harmony, she whispered to her own reflection. Grandmother. What did you know that you didn't tell me? She made her way toward the throne room and walked directly into Unre. Not metaphorically. Damilare came around a stone corridor and Unre was there, and they nearly collided, and Unre's hand came up and steadied Damilare's arm with the graceful reflex of someone who never loses her footing. She was beautiful in the way of a person who has never needed to perform beauty because it simply was. Elegant. Composed. Korean. She wore a hanbok of soft gray and deep green, and her hair was pinned with a silver ornament that caught the lantern light. She looked at Damilare, all of her, the hanbok, the hair, the face, the back where the sigil was, and something moved behind her eyes. Fast. Gone before it could be named. The mask replaced it seamlessly. "You must be Damilare," she said. "Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Unre. A pause, small and weighted. "I have known Rihan since we were children." Another pause. Then the smile, technically perfect in every measurement. "Welcome to Seoul." She stepped aside and let Damilare pass. And when Damilare's back was to her, Unre's composure dropped for exactly 1 second. Not into tears. Into something quieter and more permanent than tears. Then she straightened, lifted her chin, and walked the other direction. The throne room was large and firelit, with columns of dark wood and a ceiling that drew the eye upward the way cathedrals do, as though height itself was a form of honesty. Lord Taesok sat not on the throne but in a chair beside it, a deliberate choice. Damilare would understand later. The choice of a man who wants a conversation, not an audience. Rihan stood to his father's left, shoulder freshly wrapped, still in the black sleeve he'd arrived in, except that a healer had cleaned the blood from it as much as it could be cleaned. He watched her cross the room. She did not look at him. She sat. Taesok spoke. 400 years ago, he began. The founders of this kingdom wrote a covenant. Not in law, not in custom, in blood. 2 royal lines, the crown of Seoul and an ancient African lineage, were bound across dimensional planes. The founders believed that every kingdom reaches a moment of its darkest crisis, and that for Seoul, only the joining of these 2 bloodlines would awaken the kingdom's full power and turn the darkness back. Damilare sat very still. This was how she listened to things that changed everything, with perfect stillness, because if she moved she might lose one word and she could not afford to. "The sigil on your back," Taesok continued, "is not a birthmark. It is a seal of covenant, placed on the women of your lineage by the founding agreement itself. Your grandmother carried it. Her mother before her. The women of your bloodline have been called dreamers, since before anyone alive can remember." "The dreams," Damilare said quietly. Taesok looked at her steadily. "I've had them since I was a child," she said. "Battles. Fire. A throne room. A war I didn't understand." She looked at the floor, then back up. "I take sleeping pills for them." "Those are not dreams," Taesok said. "Those are memories of wars being fought on this plane while you sleep, child. You have been fighting alongside us for years. You simply woke up on the wrong side each morning not knowing what you were doing here." The silence lasted several seconds. "The man who sent those men to kill us in Seoul," she said. "With the helicopter and the guns. That was your brother. Baron Jinho. My younger brother." Taesok's voice remained even, but something aged visibly behind his eyes when he said the name. "He has spent 10 years dismantling this kingdom from within. He knows the prophecy. He knows the only thing that can stop him from taking this throne is the sigil bearer joining with the crown heir. That is why he wants you dead above everything else. So he can cross dimensions. Not time travel. More like," Taesok paused. "He can access the gates between planes. As can Rihan. As can Naoyo." Damilare looked at Rihan for the first time since she'd sat down. He was watching her with that expression he had, the one that was not warm exactly, but was completely present. Like she was the only thing in the room that was real enough to require his full attention. "I'm a girl from Lagos," she said, "who works in IT." Taesok's eyes warmed slowly, the way embers warm. "And you are the woman written in our blood 400 years before you were born." "Both things are true, Damilare. Neither one cancels the other." Rihan was in the training yard at first light. Damilare found him from the archway, swords, precise and relentless. The same movement repeated until repetition became reflex. His shoulder wound was wrapped, his hair tied back in the ponytail, his feet placed with the certainty of a man who knows exactly how much floor he needs. He moved like he thought in Korean and felt in something older. She stood in the archway for a while. He knew she was there. He always knew. "그래서 이제 이해가 됐어요?" he said without turning. "So you understand now?" "I understand the words," she said. "I don't know what to do with them yet." She moved into the yard and sat on a stone bench at the edge. He continued training. She watched. "How long have you known?" She said. "About me. About the sigil. My father told me when I was 15. He stopped the sword motion, stood it blade down in the earth, turned to face her. He told me the sigil bearer would come, that I would know her when she arrived. And did you? No. The tattoo behind my ear went warm when I read your text. She stared at him. That's your proof. A warm tattoo. And the fact that I drove to your apartment bleeding from a gunshot wound without knowing why. He picked up the sword again. That was also a clue. She almost smiled. Almost. She caught it before it got away from her and stood up, and because Damilare processed things by talking and moving, she began to do both, pacing the yard, talking through it out loud, the way she had always thought, the way Kim had always told her was exhausting to watch. So there's a kingdom in another dimension that's been waiting for me for 4 centuries, and apparently I've been fighting in their wars in my sleep, and now there's a man trying to kill me, and the plan is that I marry a stranger because it was decided before I was born. And he crossed the yard and kissed her. Not the hallway kiss. Not emergency or grounding. Slower. More considered. More terrifying, actually, because there was no crisis to blame it on this time. It was simply a choice, and choices are scarier than instinct. She felt it in the back of her knees. She stepped back. You have to stop doing that. Ew. Why? Because I'm not your property, and I'm not your girlfriend, and I'm not your anything just because a scroll says I am. I'm a person. I get to decide. Kureo. Yes. He said it simply. You do. So stop kissing me without asking. You're right. He held her gaze. You're not my property. You're not my girlfriend. You are not anything I have a right to claim. A puss. You are my queen. That's the same thing. It isn't. He said it quietly, firmly, the way someone states a mathematical truth. A queen is not owned. A queen is recognized. She had no answer for that. She looked away. He let her. I want to learn, she said after a moment. The fighting. What you were doing just now. He looked at her. Then he held out the sword. Start here. She was terrible. She was so terrible at first that she dropped the sword twice in the first 20 minutes, and Rihan did not laugh once, which she found genuinely impressive. He corrected her grip with his hand over hers, briefly, practically, no lingering, and told her where to place her feet, and told her again when she forgot, and told her again after that without a trace of impatience. You move like you're apologizing for taking up space, he said. She stopped. What? Every swing. You pull back at the last second. Like you're afraid of what happens if you connect. He looked at her. Don't apologize. Commit. She thought about that for longer than she meant to. Then she swung. She connected. The practice post cracked down the middle. Rihan was quiet for a moment. 좋아요, he said. Good. Over 3 days of training, she learned things about him in the spaces between movements. He was 31. He had run the Terran Syndicate in Seoul since he was 26. He had never told anyone in the modern world about Seoul because some things, he said, are better kept safe in hiding. He had a habit of going quiet in the middle of conversations as though he were calculating something, and she had learned already not to fill those silences because what came after them was always worth waiting for. He learned things about her too. That she had grown up in Lagos with her mother and grandmother in a house that smelled like pepper soup and night air. That she had been accepted to 3 universities and chose IT because she wanted a skill nobody could take from her. That she had been watching Korean romance dramas for 2 years before she ever came to Korea, and that this was, she admitted with the first real humor he had heard from her, deeply ironic given current circumstances. You watch dramas about Korean men, he said. I did. And now I'm here. She gestured broadly at the ancient kingdom around her. In the drama. Except nobody told me there'd be helicopters. He looked at her for a moment. There are always helicopters, he said. She laughed, short and genuine and startled out of her, and he registered it the way you register the first rain after a long dry season. On the 3rd night, Eun-rae found Damilare on the steps of the eastern corridor, sitting with her knees pulled up and her eyes on the too many stars. 잠이 안 와요. Can't sleep? Damilare shook her head. I keep thinking. Eun-rae sat beside her. Not close, but present. They sat in silence for a while, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which surprised Damilare because silence with people she didn't know was usually a performance. Tell me about him, Damilare said. When he was young. Eun-rae was quiet for a moment. He was very serious, even as a child. He would sit at the training yard and watch the senior soldiers for hours before he ever asked to try. A pause. He laughed more then. Before the weight of the kingdom came to him fully. Does he still laugh? Eun-rae turned to look at her. More in the past 3 days than in the past 3 years. The words landed softly and stayed. The betrayal came on the 4th night without warning. It came not through violence but through paper, a set of decoded communication scrolls that one of Rihan's personal guards brought to him just after midnight, found hidden inside the lining of a military supply chest that had been moved 3 times in the past month. The guard was trembling when he handed them over. Guards of Seoul did not tremble easily. Rihan read the first scroll standing up. Then he sat down. Then he read all 6 of them. He came to his father's chamber at first light, before the rest of the palace had risen, and Taesok read the scrolls at his table while Rihan stood at the window looking out at the training yard below, his back to the room because he did not want to watch his father's face while it happened. The scrolls were communications between Baron Jinho and a source inside the palace. Troop positions, gate access schedules, the timing of the allegiance ceremony, the palace's eastern wall vulnerability that only a senior military official would know. 3 years of intelligence. Steady, methodical, comprehensive. The kind of information that doesn't leak, it's given. Deliberately. Repeatedly. Over time. The communications were signed with a seal. Commander Baek Hyun. Taesok's most trusted general. The man who had stood at the king's right hand for 20 years. The man who had trained half the soldiers currently defending these walls. The man Taesok had once called the kingdom's conscience made flesh. The silence in the chamber when Taesok finished reading was the loudest thing Damilare had ever heard, and she was only there because she had been walking past the door when Rihan entered and something in his face made her follow without being invited and he had not told her to leave. 아버지. Father. Rihan's voice was steady. Deliberate. The voice of a man who had decided before he entered the room that he would not give his grief a form that made his father's grief harder. I'm sorry. Taesok set the scrolls down flat on the table. He pressed both hands on top of them. He breathed once slowly, from the bottom of his lungs. And then he was the king again. The grief was still there. It would be there always. But it went somewhere internal where grief lives in men who cannot afford to let it run. Bring him to me, he said. They brought Baek Hyun into the throne room within the hour. He was 63 years old, silver-haired, with the posture of a man who had never once let his spine forget what it was for. He walked into the throne room between 2 guards who he had personally trained, and he held his head at the same angle. He always held it, and he looked at Taesok on the throne without looking away. He did not deny it. 나는 옳다고 믿었던 일을 했습니다. I did what I believed was right. His voice was quiet and absolutely steady. The dimensional gates should be closed. The modern world is a contamination. A woman from Lagos has no business on this throne. Enough, Rihan said. Not loudly. But Baek Hyun stopped. Rihan walked toward him slowly, the way he did everything, without wasted motion. He stopped close enough that the general had to look up slightly. You have spent 3 years feeding Jinho our positions. Our weaknesses. Our ceremony schedule. A pause. He knows everything. Yes. Then you understand what comes next. He'll attack before the ceremony, Baek Hyun said, and something in his voice was almost, not relief, but the specific exhaustion of a man who has been carrying a secret for so long that having it known feels like putting down weight. He has to. He cannot let the allegiance happen. How long do we have? 2 days. Perhaps 3. Rihan held his gaze for a long moment. 당신을 죽이지 않겠습니다. Leon said quietly. I won't kill you. That would be easier for you than what comes next. He stepped back. Take him. When the guards moved Baek Hyun from the room, Taesok sat on his throne and looked at the empty space where 20 years of trust had just been walked out the door. Damilare was at the back of the throne room, forgotten by the event, which suited her. She looked at Rihan. He turned and found her eyes across the space and held them for a moment, and in that moment she saw, past the stillness, past the control, that he was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She nodded. Barely perceptibly. Just, I see it. You don't have to hide it. Something in his face changed. Less than a millimeter. But she saw it. That night, Eun-rae sat alone at the eastern pond. The water was still and very dark and held the stars on its surface like it was keeping them safe. She sat at the edge with her knees together and her hands in her lap, and she was not crying. She had finished with crying some time ago, privately and completely, in a room where no one came, and now what was left was something quieter and more permanent than grief. It was the life on the other side of grief. The life that had to be built from what remained after you'd stopped pretending something might change. She heard footsteps. She looked up. Damilare sat beside her. Not close, but present. They watched the stars and the water for a while. "You love him," Damilare said. Not a question. Not accusatory. Said the way you say things that are simply true. Eunrae did not deny it. Did not flinch. "I have," she said. "For most of my life." "I'm sorry. Don't be. You didn't choose this any more than I did." She looked at the water. "He looked at me the way he looks at everyone he trusts completely. He looks at you the way he looks at the sky just before dawn, like something he's been waiting for without knowing he was waiting." Her voice was steady. "Even. I always knew the difference between the two. I simply hoped for a very long time that I was wrong." Silence. The pond breathed. "You deserve someone who looks at you like the dawn too," Damilare said quietly. Eunrae turned and looked at her fully for the first time. And the smile that came, slow, real, arriving from somewhere beneath all the composure, was the most honest thing she had offered anyone in years. "Yes," she said. "I do." 2 days. That was what they had. The palace reorganized itself with the efficiency of a body that knows it's about to be hit and has decided to be ready. Soldiers moved to new positions. The gate access codes were changed. The eastern wall's vulnerability was shored up with additional troops who worked through the night in shifts. Rihan trained every hour he was not in strategy meetings. Damilare trained beside him. She was better now. Not a warrior, not by any standard that Seoul used, but a woman who had committed to the motion the way Rihan had told her to, without pulling back, without apologizing for taking up space. On the morning of the second day, she found him on the tower wall at dawn looking out over the treeline. She stood beside him. Neither spoke for a while. "Na Seoul ka," she said. "I'm going to fight." "Anya." "No. You taught me. I'm better." "I know." "Then. I know you can fight." He turned to look at her. "That's not why I said no." He was quiet for a moment, and the quiet had that quality of his where something real was being calculated and the result would be honest. "I said no because I'm afraid. And I'm telling you that because I don't tell anyone anything, and I need you to understand what this means." The dawn was arriving behind him in layers of pink and pale gold. She looked at him in it. "이 모든 게 뭘 의미하는 거야?" She said quietly. "What does all this mean?" "I've waited for you for 400 years. He said it simply, the way he said all the things that mattered most, without drama as fact. "I would like more than 1 week." "Beat. "Nanan Seoul ka," she said again. "I'm going to fight." He looked at her for a long moment. And then, almost. The almost smile. The rarest thing in Seoul. "그래요." "I know." Jinho's forces came at midnight. They came from 3 directions simultaneously. Through the northern gate, the eastern wall's former weak point, and a third entry point that none of the revised strategy had anticipated, which meant there was a second informant, someone in the room during the strategy revision. And this knowledge moved through Rihan's mind like cold water while he was already fighting, and he filed it for later, because there was no later until there was a now to survive. The Battle of Seoul was loud in a way that no film or story ever gets entirely right. Not just the sound of weapons, but the sound of ground under running feet, of orders shouted across distances in the dark, of soldiers who trained their whole lives testing everything they had learned against people who had been planning this for 10 years. Damilare fought in the outer courtyard. She fought badly in some moments and well in others and kept fighting through both. The anger that 3 years in Kim Young's shadow had given her, the anger she had never been allowed to direct outward, that she had turned inward until it was indistinguishable from shame, had found, in the training yard with Rihan, a direction that wasn't inward. She used it now. She used it completely. The sigil on her back grew warm. Not the mild warmth it had on the night she sent the text. Heat. Real and spreading, the way dawn spreads, like something ancient waking up in layers. Her movements became sharper. Not magical. She was not suddenly a master. but more certain. Like the hesitation had burned away, and what was left was just decision, one after another, clean and clear. Eun-rae appeared at her left side without being asked, sword in hand, and fought there the entire night. The woman who had every reason to step back chose to step forward. She fought for the kingdom she had loved her whole life, for the woman who had sat with her at the pond without judgment, and for the version of herself that was not defined by what she hadn't been chosen for. "Eun-쪽," Eun-rae called. Left. Damilare turned and blocked. The impact ran up her arms. She pushed back, stepped in, used the throw Rihan had drilled into her until she stopped falling. The man went down. She stepped over him. "감사해요," she said between breaths. "Thank you," 나중에, Eun-rae said. Later. Already moving. Inside the throne room, Rihan found his uncle. Jinho was standing at the center of the room as though he had always planned to end up here, as though the 10 years of dismantling and informants and helicopters over apartment buildings in Seoul were all just the scenic route to this exact location. He was silver-haired like Taesok, but where Taesok wore his age like something earned, Jinho wore his like something that had happened to him and that he resented. He was elegant. Absolutely and dangerously elegant, the way of a man who has been the smartest person in every room he has entered for so long that he has forgotten what it costs him. 당신의 아버지가 왕좌를 나에게 넘겼어야 했어. Your father should have given the throne to me. He gave it to the kingdom, Rihan said. Sentiment. Legacy. Jinho circled. Rihan circled. The torches in the throne room burned low and hot, and the shadows between them moved. 너는 왕국을 외국 여자에게 줄 것이냐? You would give this kingdom to a foreign woman. His voice was clean and measured, the voice of a man making an argument he finds obvious. Someone who didn't know we existed 48 hours ago. She doesn't sit on this throne for where she's from, Rihan said. She sits on it for what she carries. What she is. A girl from Lagos. The woman written in our founding blood 400 years before she was born. Jinho moved. Fast, technical, precise. Every movement built on 10 years of planning this specific outcome. He was better than Rihan expected, which meant he had been training in the shadows the whole time, which meant everything he showed publicly was a performance of less than he was. This was Jinho's greatest weapon. He had always been underestimating while being underestimated. It was brutal and it was not clean, and there were moments during it where the outcome could have gone either way. But Rihan was better. Not by much and bleeding in 3 places by the end, but better. Jinho went to his knees. Sword gone. Breathing hard. Looking up at Rihan with the specific expression of a man who genuinely cannot understand why the world did not arrange itself correctly. Rihan stood over him. The kill was geometrically available. One movement, right here. The war ended. The threat ended. Permanently. He lowered his weapon. 나는 당신이 아니야. He said quietly. I am not you. And this kingdom will not begin its next era in blood that didn't need to be spilled. He looked at the soldiers behind him. Take him. Jinho was stripped of his title in the throne room with witnesses present. His gate access was sealed. He was escorted out of Seoul and into a distant corner of the plain, not dead, but contained. The threat of him was real for years to come in small ways that the kingdom would navigate. But the war was over. The siege collapsed without its general. Outside, the battle horns went quiet. Seoul exhaled. After the war, the palace went quiet the way places do when they have been braced for a long time and can finally release, slowly in stages, like joints unclenching after cold. The wounded were tended to. The walls were assessed. The torches that had burned through the siege were replaced with fresh ones, and the palace began to smell like something other than adrenaline, like wood and night flowers and the particular warmth of lantern light that means you survived. Rihan was in the healer's room for an hour and emerged with his shoulder rewrapped and his 3 other wounds cleaned and bandaged. He found Damilare in the outer courtyard, sitting on the steps, her burgundy hanbok dusty at the hem and her hands resting open in her lap the way hands rest when they've been through something and have come out the other side. She looked up when she heard him. Looked at the bandaging visible above his collar. At the cut along his jaw. At the general evidence of a man who had been through what she had been through and was still standing, which she found, and she would have to think later about what this said about her. Deeply, specifically attractive. 앉아도 돼. he said. Can I sit? It's your kingdom, she said. That's not an answer. Yes, she said. You can sit. He sat beside her. Not close, but present. The courtyard was quiet except for the distant sound of healers and the occasional voice of a soldier crossing the far yard. The sky above Seoul had moved past midnight into the deep blue that is not quite dawn. "찾아낼 거야," he said quietly. "We'll find him." The second informant. Neither of them had said it aloud since the battle, but both had known since it ended. "I know," she said. "The kingdom is safe tonight." "I know." They sat in the quiet for a moment. 내 문신이 뭐라고 쓰여 있는지 알아? He said. Do you know what my tattoo says? She shook her head. He reached up and touched the line of characters behind his left ear. 그녀가 피를 흘릴 때 나를 찾을 것이다. She will find me when she bleeds. He lowered his hand. It was written on me the night I was born. My father told me I would understand it when the time came. Damilare was quiet for a long moment. My grandmother called the sigil a crown I didn't know I was wearing, she said. I thought she was being poetic. She wasn't. No. A pause. She knew, didn't she? She knew what I was. What it meant. I think the women of your lineage who carried the sigil always knew. At some level. In the dreams, if not in the waking. She thought about her grandmother, the woman who had pressed her palm flat against Damilare's back when she was small, who had smiled in that specific way that adults smile when they know something a child isn't ready for, who had said the crown you don't know you're wearing, my love, with such certainty that a 7-year-old in Lagos had believed her completely before forgetting it for 20 years. I have to go back, Damilare said. Rihan didn't argue. She felt him absorb the words and sit with them without resistance. I know, he said. My mother depends on what I send home. My job, she paused. I have things I left unfinished there. I need to go back as who I am now. Not as who I was when I sent that text. She looked at her hands. There's a man. Kim Young. I need to end it properly. With my own 2 feet on my own floor, looking him in the face. Not because I'm afraid, for the first time. Actually because I'm not. 나도 알아. I know. His voice was very quiet. I know. Will I be able to come back? Or is this, she stopped. She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't want to give the ending she feared a form. Did you find me through a wrong number? He said. She looked at him. Then I think, he said, the mechanism for finding each other is already handled. She laughed. Short and startled and completely real, and she felt it move through her the way relief moves, from the chest outward. And then she took his face in both of her hands and she kissed him. First this time. Deliberately. Her decision, her motion, her claim. He went completely still for 1 second in the way of someone receiving something they had stopped letting themselves want. Then his hands came up, one at her back, one at the side of her face, and he kissed her back with the full weight of a man who has been patient for longer than 1 lifetime and can finally put the patience down. When they separated, she kept her hands where they were, his face in her palms. She could feel the warmth of the cut along his jaw under her thumb. 나중에, she said. Later. 나중에, he said. Later. And he smiled. The real one. The rare one. The one that arrived without warning and rearranged everything in the room around it. She memorized it. She was going to need it. She was returned through the gate at dawn. Her apartment. Her building. Mapogusol. 14th floor. Everything exactly where she had left it. The wine glass on the coffee table, the takeout container, the TV screen glowing with alchemy of souls paused on a frame she recognized. The rain against her windows. Her black silk pajamas. She looked at her phone. 11:42 p.m. She had left at 11:37. 5 hours in Seoul. 5 minutes in Seoul. She sat on her bed. The room was the same room. The same lamp, the same sheets, the same view of the Seoul night from the same window. Everything the same. Except her. The sigil on her back was warm against the fabric of her pajamas. She sat very still and she let it all exist inside her at once. The kingdom, the war, the pond at night, Unre's honest smile, Lord Taesok's face when he said both things are true, child, the real smile, the one she was carrying home. Then she stood up. Duh, she said to the room. Okay. Kim came home the next morning. She heard his key in the lock and she was already standing. Not waiting. Not braced the way she used to brace, but simply standing in her kitchen making coffee, already dressed for work, already somewhere inside herself he had never managed to reach. He came in still wearing what he'd worn the night before. Casino-faced. She knew every version of Kim's face, and this was the one where he had lost badly and was carrying it at the jaw. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. He set his jacket on the chair that she had always mentally designated as his putting things on chair, and she had always resented that she had designated it that way. "Where have you been?" he said. "Seoul," she said. "I called you 6 times last night." "I know." Something in her voice registered. He looked at her more carefully. She met his eyes without the slight downward angle she had always defaulted to, the angle that said "I'm here but slightly smaller than I should be. Is that okay? Is this okay?" She was not at the downward angle. "Kim," she said. "I'm done." The silence was significant. "More." "What?" "I'm done. This is finished. Whatever you did for me when I came here, the visa, the job, my mother's bills. We are past even. You know exactly what you cost me for everything you gave, and I am done counting the debt." She picked up her coffee. "Don't call me. Don't come here. Don't send anyone here. We are finished." He moved then, the way Kim moved when the script changed on him, when something in his control shifted and he reached for the only language he had left. His hand came up. She caught his wrist. The grip was clean and exact, the way Rihan had taught her, not strength against strength but angle and position, the geometry of it. She held his wrist and she looked at him and she said, very quietly, "Don't." Then she performed the exact throw that Rihan had made her repeat until she stopped falling. She did not pull back. She did not apologize for taking up space. She committed. Kim Young hit the floor of his own apartment. He stared up at her from the floor. She looked down at him, not with anger, not with satisfaction exactly, with something cleaner than either. With clarity. "Goodbye, Kim," she said. She picked up her bag. She walked out the door. She did not look back once. The weeks that followed were ordinary in a way that was extraordinary. She went to work. She was good at her job. She had always been good at her job, better than what she'd been placed at when Kim had arranged the role, and within 2 weeks her direct manager noticed what everyone in the department had noticed for a year and a half but no one had formalized. She was promoted. Senior IT security. The salary was different. She noted the difference without needing to perform gratitude for it because it was not a gift, it was owed. She called her mother on Sunday mornings now, instead of the rushed Tuesday evening calls she'd been making for 2 years. Her mother, who had worried about Damilare with the specific texture of a woman who worries and cannot say exactly why, listened to her daughter's voice on those Sunday mornings and heard something that had been missing, and was now returned and did not ask where it had been because some things come back and the important thing is that they come. Damilare bought her own phone plan, saved her own contacts, chose her own ringtone. These are small things. And they are enormous things. They are the same thing. She missed Rihan the way you miss something that has no replacement and no analogy, not like missing a person who is in another city, not like missing a time, but like the specific ache of knowing that the most real thing you have ever experienced is in a dimension you can't access by train or by choice or by trying. She didn't fight the feeling. She carried it. She let it exist and she did not make herself small around it, and she went to work and called her mother and was good at her job and she carried it. 3 weeks after she returned. Evening. Early dark arriving the way it does in Seoul in the late season, coming down like something decided. She was walking home from the office, hood up, earphones in, feet finding the familiar path from the Mapogu station to her building with the automatic ease of repetition. She turned the corner of her street. And she stopped. He was standing under the streetlight outside her building. Rihan Taran. 6'2". Long black hair loose and rain-damp, not the ponytail down, the way it had been the night it all began, falling partially across his face with a few strands the rain had darkened. A dark Armani suit, open at the collar, the kind of suit that belongs in boardrooms and makes no attempt to pretend it doesn't. The line of Korean characters behind his left ear just barely visible in the lamplight. He was looking at his phone. Then something made him look up. Their eyes met across the rain-wet street. She walked toward him. Then she was running. She reached him and kissed him before he could speak, before he could produce whatever line he had prepared for this moment, and she felt him catch her, both arms, the automatic physics of finally, one hand at the back of her head, one at her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground the way you lift things you've been afraid of dropping. The rain came down on both of them, and Seoul kept going around them the way cities keep going, indifferent and glittering, and for once in her life she did not care what the city was doing. When they separated, she looked up at him. His chin was damp. His eyes were the warmest she had ever seen them. "How did you get here?" she said. He looked down at her with the rare smile, full, real, arrived without warning, and said, "Wrong number." She laughed and held him tighter and pressed her face against his chest and let the rain do whatever it wanted. Seoul kept raining. The sigil on her back was warm between her shoulder blades. Somewhere in another dimension, in a kingdom written in her blood, lanterns burned above a throne room that had been waiting 400 years for this specific moment on this specific street under this specific rain. The crown she hadn't known she was wearing. She was wearing it now. And if you made it to the end of this story, if you felt something, if you cried, if you replayed any part of it, if Damilare's name is going to live in your chest for the next 3 days, then this channel is exactly where you need to be. Subscribe. Hit the bell. Leave a comment telling me which scene wrecked you the most. Drop a like if Damilare catching that wrist made you want to stand up. This story belongs to you now. Share it with someone who needs it. Until the next one.